Hi everyone, welcome to In the Chair with Dr. Gina. These moments are meant to be conversations beyond the chapter, a companion series to some formal lectures I've created to courses I teach. This particular series accompanies Foundations of Telemental Health. In these companion conversations, we're going to step away from the textbook for at least a few minutes and talk about what counseling looks like in real life. Think of these conversations as what we might have if we hung around after class for a few minutes together, grabbed a coffee to talk, or had lunch and talked shop over breaking bread together. These are things that don't really fit necessarily in a chapter summary or in a PowerPoint presentation. But let's talk about telemental health. As you move through the course, reflecting on what telehealth is, what it looks like, how you imagine your online practice to be, I want to share something with you that really surprised me. I've been a counselor for a long time, and when telehealth started becoming more and more common, I thought of it more as a delivery method. I thought, okay, this is counseling through a computer. What I learned is that it's both much simpler and much more complex than that. The simple part is the technology. Honestly, most of you will be able to learn a telemental health platform in an afternoon. You'll figure out where the buttons are, how to share screen, how to send a link, how to troubleshoot basic problems. That's not the hard part. The hard part is learning how to be fully present with another human being when they're not sitting directly across from you. One of the things I love about counseling is how we get invited into these moments that people really don't share with anyone else. We hear the stories behind the stories. We witness grief, fear, hope, shame, courage, and sometimes profound transformation. What surprised me about telemental health is that these moments still happen. I've cried with clients through a screen. I've celebrated victories through a screen. I've watched people make life-changing decisions through a screen. I've seen clients take risks that they never thought they would take. The transformative moments still occur. But they don't happen because we mastered the software. They happen because we learned how to show up. In fact, telemental health has given me access to parts of clients' lives that I would never see in a traditional office. I've met dogs, cats, children, spouses, and occasionally a chicken. I've watched clients in the spaces where panic attacks happen. I've seen the kitchen where family conflicts occur. I've met military veterans who live hours away from the nearest counselor. I've worked with people in rural communities where finding a specialist could have required driving at least several hours. I've had clients join session from inside their parked vehicles because it was the only private place they could find. And every one of those experiences taught me something very important. Access matters. One of the things the beginning of this textbook talks about from the course Foundations of Telemental Health is the increased access to care. I thought I understood that concept pretty well. I mean, I work remotely. I teach remotely. I see clients remotely. Telemental health or telehealth is a very normal part of my professional life. But a few months ago, my husband taught me something about telemedicine that I had not fully appreciated. Now, my husband had gotten it into his head that he wanted B12 injections. Apparently, his grandma had taken them faithfully for decades. And for whatever reasons, he became convinced this was the path he needed to explore. His primary care provider, however, was not as convinced, especially because we were talking about self-injections. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I guess that's the end of that. Not even close. He pulled out his credit card, logged on to an online medical service, met virtually with a physician, discussed the issue, obtained a prescription, and had it called into the pharmacy. The entire process took less than an hour. I remember sitting there thinking, well, that was remarkably efficient. Now, I'm not suggesting that every healthcare issue needs to be handled entirely online. There are absolutely situations where in-person evaluation is appropriate and necessary. But I did learn something important that day. Access isn't about geography. It's about friction. How many steps stand between a person and the care they need? How many barriers have to be overcome before someone receives help? How much time, travel, scheduling, transportation, childcare, paperwork, or inconvenience is required before a person can access support? For my husband, telemedicine removed a tremendous amount of friction from the process. And it reminded me that when we talk about telehealth, we're not simply talking about technology. We're talking about access. We're talking about reducing barriers. We're talking about meeting people where they are. And if you've taken another class with me, you probably know I'm about to bring Adler into the conversation. One of the ideas Adler returned to again and again was social interest, Gemeinschaftsgefühl. The notion that healthy individuals and healthy societies find ways to support connection, contribution, and mutual benefit. Adler said, social interest is not always altruistic, referring to that sense of mutual benefit. I would add, particularly in our profession of counselor education, that mutual formation is a critical piece of that social interest. As I watched my husband navigate that experience in telemedicine, I found myself thinking about telehealth, and at its best, it's an expression of social interest. Not because it's convenient, not because it's trendy, but because it expands who can receive care. The military spouse that moves frequently, the parent who can't find childcare, the client who lives in a rural community, the person whose anxiety makes it very difficult to walk into an office without feeling overwhelmed, the older patient who doesn't drive comfortably anymore, the person who simply would not receive care if telehealth were not available. That's what excites me most about telepractice. Not the technology, the opportunity, the possibility that more people access support, more people can access counseling and healthcare in all aspects of their lives, more than ever before. Here's the part I wish someone had told me sooner. Being physically distant does not mean being relationally distant. In fact, I've had telehealth sessions where I felt more connected than in some in-person interactions. Why? Why is that? Because connection isn't created by proximity. Connection is created by attention. It comes from slowing it down. It comes from curiosity. It comes from noticing. It comes from asking, what's happening right now, in the moment when something shifts in your client? And genuinely wanting to know the answer. As counselors in training or new counselors, many of you are understandably worried about technique. You're worried if you're asking the right questions, using the right intervention, following the right model. These things do matter. But over the years, I've become convinced that clients are transformed less by our cleverness and more by our capacity to be with them in the special way that counselors are. To be truly with them. The technology changes, the platforms change, the regulations change. But the human need to feel heard, understood, and respected remains the same. So as you move through the chapter, the text, and the course, learn the ethics, learn the technology, become competent in all of those ways. But don't forget that telehealth is ultimately not about screens. It's about people. And if you can hold on to that truth, you'll be far ahead of many clinicians who focus only on the technology and forget the relationship. Because that's where the real work happens. And as you continue your work this week, I would encourage you to think about this question. What does presence look like when the therapist and the client are not in the same room? We'll keep exploring that question throughout this course and this series of conversations. Be well, and I'll meet you back here soon in the chair.